Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. Excited to spend some time talking about our new enterprise features and some of the advances in CodeCatalyst over the last few months. I'm Kyle Seaman, one of the product managers with the team, and this is Harry.
And I'm Harry Maurer. I'm the director of DevOps services at AWS. And before we get into all the new features, I want to talk a little bit about CodeCatalyst and where we are today. So it was just about this time last year, actually it was this time last year at reInvent that we launched CodeCatalyst in preview, and then earlier this year in April, we made it generally available for everybody. And what we're trying to do with CodeCatalyst is make it the best place for you and your teams to build, plan, create, test, and deploy applications on AWS. And how we do that is by bringing together all the tools that your teams need to go from idea to production in one seamless experience that's managed by AWS and is deeply integrated to the cloud. CodeCatalyst has a wide range of features, and we're going to talk a lot about them today, which include things like issue boards to help you and your team plan and manage your work, source control management tools that make it easy for developers to collaborate on code changes and review code. We also include managed cloud-based dev environments that make it really easy for developers to get up and running and debugging code without ever having to install anything on their laptop. And of course, we include really robust and powerful CI/CD tools that make it super easy for you to build, test, and deploy your applications on AWS. In addition to all the great features that already existed, this week we've made a number of announcements and introduced a number of new features. One of the ones I'm really excited to talk about is how we've integrated Amazon Q directly into CodeCatalyst. For those that aren't familiar with Q, it's a digital AI-powered assistant that helps you with a wide range of tasks across multiple AWS platforms, including the management console, our documentation, popular IDEs, and of course now CodeCatalyst. I really believe that this is going to really transform how developers and teams build software in the future. Now developers can go from idea to fully mergeable pull requests simply by creating an issue in CodeCatalyst and assigning it to Q. Q does all the heavy lifting of figuring out what your code actually does. We'll work with you on an approach for how it's going to add that new feature, and then you can actually instruct Q to go all the way to generate the code and have a fully mergeable pull request. In addition to using Q to add features to your applications, we've also harnessed the power of Q to make it simple for everyday developer tasks, like summarizing all the changes in your pull request or creating a digest of comments for an ongoing pull request so you can jump in and know where you can affect the change. In addition to adding Q into CodeCatalyst, we've also added a number of new features and released new capabilities this week for managing your teams as you scale on CodeCatalyst. One of those is integration with SSO, so now you can manage your users on CodeCatalyst using your existing IDP like you do with all users across all your other systems. In addition to that, we've also included a new concept around teams, additional roles for you to better manage how your developers interact with each other within a project, and integration with VPC so you can better secure your build and test environments. One of the key features that I mentioned before is our robust and really powerful CI/CD workflows. And throughout the year, we've made a number of improvements, both through our community efforts with our field, as well as from the product team. And this week, I'm really proud to announce that we've added an additional 6 workflow actions, including support for deploying to EKS, Terraform support, as well as a number of other ones. In addition to that, we've also released a new SDK to make it easy for you to run your workflows from external systems and processes. One of the other exciting new things that we launched this week was a new enterprise plan. We're going to talk a lot about this during the session here. One of the things I want to talk about the plan is our pricing. So we introduced a new enterprise pricing tier that makes it easy for you to cost-effectively scale your usage of CodeCatalyst. When you're using the enterprise tier, each individual costs $20, up to 20, or starts at $20. And more importantly, as you add users to that tier, we increase the number of compute minutes and dev environment hours so that all of your developers have all the resources they need to do their work without incurring any additional or unexpected costs. Each enterprise space gets up to 1,500 compute minutes to run your CI/CD workflows across all your teams. And can you scroll, Kyle?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
And 160 dev environment hours, so every developer on your team has access to their own development environment whenever they need it. The enterprise tier includes all of the features that we're going to talk about today, including one that we're really excited to, and we're going to dive into, custom blueprints. So those who aren't familiar with blueprints are a unique feature of CodeCatalyst, which makes it really easy for you to start building applications easily the right way. You simply choose the type of application that you want to build, and a blueprint will generate everything you need to build, test, deploy, and maintain your application, including the infrastructure, the application code, the workflows, and everything that your team needs to go from idea to production in one CodeCatalyst project. One of the first things that customers asked us when they saw blueprints was, how can I create my own? And we're excited to announce that with the enterprise tier, now you can create your own blueprints. And we're also excited to announce and show you today some of the new features that make it really easy for you to maintain your projects even as your blueprints evolve. So rather than me continue to talk more about that, why don't I hand it over to Kyle, and he can show you a demo of this.
Thank you. All right. So yeah, thanks, Eric. So like I said, for those of you who have used blueprints, they've always been popular as this concept of more than just a template, but a code generator where you can define your infrastructure as code, your starting code, as well as the pipelines that will deploy it. So today what I'm going to do is give you a demo of using a custom blueprint now to create a simple Lambda stack that conforms to the best practices of your company, in this case, a cost center tag. We're also going to show how you can make it dynamic, including an optional DynamoDB part, and then how you can define the regions in which the blueprint can deploy to, as well as configuring the AWS accounts. So we'll jump right in. We'll start in a CodeCatalyst space. Space is a container for your projects. It also is where you can manage configurations and settings across your different projects. So now under settings, there's a new tab called Blueprints. And this is where you and your team can manage the blueprint catalog and what's available in your space. So from here, we'll go ahead and create our first blueprint in this space. We'll give it a name, base Lambda blueprint stack. And then what we're going to do is add the details, because what this is going to do is show up in a catalog. So you and your development team will be able to pick the different blueprints that are appropriate for their use case. So we'll give it a description so it makes it a little easier to discover, add some tags to that. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to have this selected is a release workflow. So this is being built inside of CodeCatalyst, so you get to benefit from our CI/CD tooling. And what the release workflow is going to do is every time there's a new version, it will publish it in preview to the catalog, and then you'll have the option to make it available for everyone. So now we jump into CodeCatalyst, and we can go look at the source repository that got created for our blueprint. And as we mentioned, these are just TypeScript applications. They have our workflow defined in there. And where we're really going to spend our time right now is on the source as well as the static assets. And I'll show you just a little bit of how to think about these blueprints. You could pull this down to your local machine now and start developing. Or you can use one of the dev environments that Harry mentioned, open in Visual Studio Code, maybe JetBrains, or you can use Cloud9 in the browser, which we'll do for this demo. So when we select that, we're going to have the option now to open it in a new branch. So we'll do that. That way we can use pull requests and the other features of CodeCatalyst, and we'll name this Add Lambda. So what this is going to do now is spin up a dev environment. What's really cool is I didn't have to configure my local machine to run blueprints. The dev environment comes pre-configured. It's authenticated into CodeCatalyst, and I can get started quickly. So what we're going to do now is a bit of a deep dive into what the blueprint looks like. But there's two main areas. We have a source file, or source folder, which has our blueprint.ts, which is our application. That's where you define options for the blueprint, as well as the logic, like what files are we going to generate, the workflows we're going to build. And then, of course, we have a defaults so that they work out of the box. And then we're going to go into static assets. This is where you can generate a Python app, Java, whatever you want. In this case, we're going to do a CDK stack with a Lambda folder. And then we're going to create a Dynamo one as well so we can show how you can switch between the two. So we'll jump back into the IDE and spend some time in the terminal, so bear with it. We're going to clean up the static assets file and basically create our new base folder. And what we're going to do is CDK init. Simplest way to kind of get our whole structure set up for how we want our project to look like. Because really think about this, the static assets is what will get put into the developer's project. So this is where you're really kind of scaffolding this out in one spot so you can reuse it. So this will stand up the full CDK stack that we need. Of course, it will be a generic stack, and we'll start to customize that. The first thing we're going to do is actually delete, there's an npm ignore in here, which we'll get rid of because we have an overview of that. We'll get rid of that guy. And then we're going to add our Lambda folder in here. And this is, again, super helpful. Everyone probably has Everyone who starts up a project copy and pastes in their Lambda starter, you go. This is a great way if you have common patterns that you use, you can just codify this inside of this index.js. Here it's the simplest, hello Lambda that will return. But it's enough to actually be a running code for the developer. We'll update our gitignore to recognize that there's a Lambda folder, and we'll make sure those JS files get pulled in. And now what we're going to do is touch the CDK stacks. And again, this could be CloudFormation, Terraform, any of those, but we'll do it in CDK. This, out of the box, comes with a base stack name. Of course, we don't want that. We want dynamic ones. So we'll use templating, and I'll show you how this gets used a little later. But basically, we'll have a dynamic stack name that's added into the CDK. And then we'll actually go into the base stack folder and paste in a simple stack that has a Lambda function as a backend, as well as an API gateway connected to that. And you can see at the bottom line there, we have a cost center tag that we're applying that is also dynamic based on the blueprint configuration using that templating. So, very common setup, but the idea here is you do it centrally so that your teams don't have to do it over and over again. Now in the blueprint file, these are the options. These are what you're exposing to your developers to select. So you kind of choose how many options and how far they can go with this. We're going to paste in a few for the stack name, cost center. We're going to predefine some regions, and then we're going to use an environment component that makes it really easy to connect to some AWS accounts. So with those set up, we just need to import that region component, and we'll see it in the UI, how this renders up for everyone. The next step is going into the actual blueprint code. We check for the defaults to make sure it does run. We'll clean up some of the placeholder and add our new defaults, which will be a development environment. We'll give it a default region. We'll give it a cost center of generic. This could be whatever you want, kind of from a best out-of-the-box experience. And then last thing we're going to do is the blueprint can actually create CodeCatalyst resources, so we want a workflow, right? It's one thing to have your code. It's one thing to have your stack. You need to get that into the cloud. So what we're going to do is pull in the static asset file. We're actually going to do the substitution on top of that, and we're going to look for everywhere we see cost center and stack name, those will get updated to whatever the blueprint options were. Those will now be part of the bundle of the code. And then what we can do is write a workflow that will take that and deploy it into the AWS account. So we'll just go ahead and update our blueprint workflow now. So those unfamiliar with workflows, think of them as they're attached to source repositories. They have many actions that you can run in there, and we'll be showing some more demos on that a little later today. Here I'm making a non-push domain, so it's triggered when a push is made to the main branch, we're going to run this. And it's a simple action to get started. It has a CDK bootstrap, which makes sure the account can work with this, as well as a CDK deploy. So out of the box, you don't have to worry about any of that. We're doing the kind of connection into the AWS account. The environment tab I showed you earlier does all the management with IAM, with temporary credentials. And with that, we have a standing up application now that we can share with our developers. Last thing I wanted to do while we're in here is add the Dynamo option. So what we're going to do is under static assets, add a new Dynamo folder. And we're going to mirror the lib base stack. And what we're going to do is make one that has Dynamo in it instead of just the API gateway with Lambda. And with that set up, what we'll now have is the ability to, we'll paste this in. And then what you'll see here is we have the Dynamo stack being imported. We're attaching it into the function. And now what we can do is inside of blueprint.ts, we have a new static asset decision to make. So we'll go and update that, and then I'll show you what this looks like. So that's the last step, is back into blueprints. And then you can go in here and add underneath. So we're doing the substitution. We're pulling in all that code. We've set up our project code. And now we're going to do a check if the developer has chosen to use Dynamo. If they do that, we'll check that folder, pull that file in, update the cost center, and then blueprints are able to merge those diffs. So we do that. Now we just need to expose that option to our developers, which we'll do here. We'll call it use Dynamo. Under database, you could have other options. And then what we'll do is update the defaults to have it as false. And so that's a high-level, straightforward kind of blueprint with a few options. And what we're doing now is we're going to push that back into CodeCatalyst as part of our development lifecycle, because we expect platform engineering team, internal teams to be building these and using similar development workflows as feature teams. So that could push us back, and now we can go back into CodeCatalyst to see actually how to make it work with everything else. So back in CodeCatalyst, we're going to go ahead, we're going to merge our new branch, or go to our new branch and create a pull request, so we can merge that back into main. So we'll do that here, create a pull request. This is, depending on your policies, other reviewers or approvers, however it runs. In this case, we'll just go ahead and review it ourselves. But we're building this pull request. We'll have a history of the change that made with that blueprint. And we're starting to version now these blueprints, which is your entire code base, not just packages. And you can see the diff here. And then we'll go ahead and choose our merge strategy and push that in. You might recall we had the workflow release pipeline set up. So what that's going to do is once we merge this in, this is automatically going to take this new blueprint, it's going to bundle it up, and it's going to push it into the catalog. So with that being done, we'll hop over to workflows. We can see it's kicked off, it's running, and it's now pushing a new version up. So it's got a few steps, just sanity checking the versions, building it, and then publishing it. So now as an administrator, I can go back into the space settings, and from there I'll see my new blueprint has arrived, and what I can do is publish that into my catalog. So we'll choose Add to Catalog and make the 1.0 our current version. And so what we've done now is, a little time in the IDE, which isn't always great, but we did it. We stood up a blueprint that's doing some simple things, taking in some default parameters and options, giving you the choice to use Dynamo or maybe not, and more importantly, giving you the workflow and everything your development team needs to click a button and have the stack standing up following best practices. So now let's take a look at the other side as the developer wanting to use this. So back into CodeCatalyst, as a developer, I can choose Create Project, and now there's a new Space Blueprints tab. So if I click that, this is your catalog. Every blueprint you publish up here, the most recent version will show up. In this case, we have the 1. Clicking into here, you can start to see how those options are rendered in the UI. And on the right-hand side, we're seeing the code that's actually in a preview state being generated. So for example, the stack name was, we added a uniqueness to the end of it, and you can see it's been auto-inserted into the code. And in the case of workflows, that environment component I mentioned knows enough to say when you choose an IAM role, it updates the workflow to know how to reference that. So what's really nice is you're codifying these options inside of your project code that are valuable at time of create, but also we'll show you a little bit later as you use your project over time. So with those settings there, I can choose my region. I can follow this is my pick list of what's been approved for me to do with this project. And now I can create a new application using that stack. So as a developer, instead of having to pull in a bunch of different tools, I just picked a blueprint, configured it to my settings, reviewed it, and I have a fully functioning code base along with the workflows and pipelines and everything I need to actually get this into production. So what we'll show is, you'll recall we made a staged workflow, which was going to do the CDK bootstrap and deploy. We'll take a look. This is running as you would expect. It was triggered on the first push. And what this is going to deploy is that first API gateway. So not only that, your developer now has a test point that they can actually use against as well. And they haven't had to worry about setting it up. They're using pre-configured AWS accounts and the IAM roles that they're allowed to. So we'll click in here and we can see the Hello Lambda, as expected. Very exciting API. So one last area I wanted to show is what we've released along with custom blueprints is the ability to revisit your configurations. Because these are codified by the blueprint, we know what you're doing and how you can change it. So in this case, let's say I wanted to add that Dynamo table a little bit later. I can come back into the blueprint configuration view at any point and choose different params. And so in this case, I'm going to add DynamoDB. I could have changed my regions, my AWS account, and it'll give me a preview of what the diff will be. So you can imagine some of these will be a little more complex. And if I like what I'm seeing here, and it makes sense, I can apply it, and what that's going to end up doing is opening a pull request for the team to review. But again, what we're doing is allowing you to have a blueprint that is best practices with a lot of options that teams can dynamically use as they see fit, while you know that they're staying within the guardrails of what's approved. So we'll see here a pull request was opened, and the team can hit that. When they merge that in, it'll go ahead and deploy the new stack into the development environment. So that is a quick look at creating a project from a blueprint. You can see how quickly a team can just get up and running. And then also the ability to actually see the configs you had in that and the way that we track those. So what I want to do now is take a look at our project lifecycle management. This is an area we hear from a lot of customers, which is, great, I've used a template, I've used something, I've deployed the code. How do I make sure everyone's up to sync? Like, how do I know what's happening? So what we do is, at CodeCatalyst, we track the blueprints that are used in each project, and we go ahead and monitor the versions that they're on and allow administrators to see what versions are being used, as well as give teams tools to update those. So let's take a look at project lifecycle management. Going back into the blueprint code base, you may or may not notice the stack we're using is node 16. We want to update it to 18. Stuff like this is a little more easy with a package.json or something. But when you want to start versioning your actual code base and knowing that this, whatever version we give this is the one that's running on 18, that's what blueprints allow you to do. Whatever you want. It could be a workflow, it could be the full stack, but it allows you to actually start using versioning broadly. So what we'll do here is bump that version of Node in the CDK stack. We'll push that back up to CodeCatalyst, and now there'll be a new version available in the catalog that the admins can approve. And so this will come up. We do a build. We're actually using our CLI deploy in this demo here, depending on your preferences, how you want to push them up. But back into settings, we now have this new blueprint version under here. You can see there's a new version. We also show all the projects in your space using this. In this case, it's just this one. But you can imagine a project with tens of hundreds of projects using many different blueprints. So we'll make this new version the catalog version. And now as a development team, inside of my project, I'm notified that there's an update available. And at any point, and depending on your internal policies and how we want to run that, you can set up hooks. But here I can go and update the blueprint. And we follow the same path, which is opening up a pull request, giving the development team, because some of these merges are going to get more complex and might need some resolving. But the goal here is to get everyone up to node 18. And so in this case, it's opening up that pull request, and it'll run and test it in the development environment before they promote it to production. So it's just a quick look at a simple way of how you can start to think about packaging and versioning your entire code base, not just packages, and how Blueprints, with its context of CodeCatalyst projects, can help you deploy those in a central way. And then we come back here and we see that we're using 1.0. So just a quick look at Blueprints here. I'm going to hand it back to Harry now, and we're going to talk a little bit more about actions.
Yeah. Just a real quick thing, what Kyle showed you. I mean, updating that, if you had one or two projects, updating one or two projects is a pretty simple task. But imagine you had thousands of projects based on that previous Blueprint version. Just by doing a couple clicks, you can have all of them updated to the latest version, and you can ensure that your developers are building the way you want them to on AWS. And one of the ways that we also see platform engineers and IT leaders using these blueprints is in a modular way. One of the things that we didn't get a chance to talk about is that you can actually apply multiple blueprints to a particular project. So you can imagine you could have blueprints just for your workflows, blueprints just for your application code, and you can mix and match them across the different projects. And we see, particularly with workflows, a good area to create a standardized template that you could apply to all your projects. Just like internally at Amazon, we try to model pipelines in a consistent way across all projects. We want to ensure that everyone's deploying code or building code to the same standards. So you can imagine that you or your platform engineers can create these blueprints that define what that standard pipeline looks like. Right? And these pipelines tend to change over time. For us, we add new regions, we add new rules for things that we learn from past deployments. And one area in particular that continues to evolve is around security and vulnerability scanning. And so one of the ways that you can use blueprints to help define how your teams ensure that they're up to the latest security standards is by creating workflows that use workflow actions to do scanning and other types of vulnerability assessment. And so I'd like to invite one of our partners up on stage, Sam Quakenbush from Mend, to show you how you can build a blueprint using one of their workflow actions to ensure that your code is secure when it gets to production. Here's Sam.
Thanks, Harry. Well, as Harry mentioned, I'm Sam Quakenbush. I'm the Senior Director of Field Engineering at Mend.io. And if you're not familiar with Mend.io, it might be because we recently rebranded over the last year and a half to better frame what we do. So we help developers with vulnerabilities in their applications. So we're an application security company solely focused on helping you find and fix those vulnerabilities, whether they're in your open source code or in your custom code. So that being said, threats are mostly focused on software applications nowadays. In the application security, state of application security in 2021, 35% of external attacks were carried out through software vulnerability exploits. The next closest was with external attacks from supply chain or third-party breaches. So think like malicious packages, from npm installs. Thinking about that, open source code has really evolved in the last 10 years. In 2015, only 26% of code used open source. In 2020, and once again, this is from State of Application Security, 99% of code bases in 2020 used open source code. I mean, a lot of things Kyle just walked you through, using npm install, Yarn, Amazon Cloud Development Kit, those are all frameworks that use a series of open source libraries. So customers need solutions that integrate with existing DevOps environments, they address application security risks, and they help developers remediate security flaws through automation, not through painful manual tasks that involve spreadsheets. And you have to support cybersecurity skills gap. So with all that being said, Kyle walked you through a lot of different ways to use blueprints. Now I'm going to show you specifically how to use a Mind workflow with a blueprint and apply that to an existing project. So kind of familiar, just to refresh what we saw earlier, we're going to go ahead into our space, and we're going to go ahead and create a new space blueprint. So then we'll go ahead and give it a name. We'll call it like a min scan workflow. And then, of course, we need to make sure we give it a display name and a description so that our developers can find this in the catalog later on. We'll also make sure we want to give it a tag. And in this case, we're just going to give it a tag named min. Now, right now, this description, the idea that we're going to be doing with this specific workflow and blueprint is that we want to scan anytime there's a pull request to our main branch. So it's very common. Hey, we're moving from development to main. We want to make sure we have a security scan so that we can enforce our policies or workflows. So as I said, then we'll give it a tag called min, and then we'll go ahead and create this blueprint. So after the blueprint's created, as Kyle showed you before, we can use our favorite IDE of choice to go ahead and edit this blueprint. In this case, we're going to use Amazon Cloud 9 to go ahead and boot up that browser environment and go ahead and work through this blueprint and edit it. Now, it does come with the default blueprint TS, but we're going to end up replacing a lot of that and kind of minimizing it down to just the workflow. Just like Harry said, you can have mix and match blueprints for different things. In this case, we're really just focusing on the CodeCatalyst workflows. So it was really quick in the demo, but basically I copy, paste, replace everything. And then I'm going to go in and basically point out that there is the Mind product. Think of this as the application name. This is one of the choices that the developer will have if they want to use the default Mind project name that I'm going to give it. I could also use this from like an environment variable, or the developer can go ahead and choose this when they've applied the blueprint. So that's in our defaults JSON, and once again, that was also tied into the blueprint.ts file. So then after we go through that, we'll kind of show you some of the different settings inside of this blueprint TS. You'll see down here, it's actually going to affect on every single repository in the project. And then we go a little bit further, we'll see that actually this happens every time there's a pull request to the main branch. And then as we go further, this may look familiar to you if you've ever used CodeCatalyst workflows. You'll see that this is an action as a part of the workflow. This is the Mind action version 1.09. And you'll see that there's a Mind license key associated to it. And then what it does is it creates a Serif report. And then a little bit further on, you'll actually see that we have a security policy. If there is any critical vulnerabilities, just one, it's going to break the pipeline. We're doing this specifically for demo purposes. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So then I'm going to go ahead and commit the code, and then I'm going to push it, and then it'll be applied to my blueprint. So as soon as I go ahead and push this code, the next thing, if you remember, you were following closely along with what Kyle did, I have to go set it in the catalog. So we're going to jump over to our space catalog, and then we'll go ahead and make this available to the developers to use. And once again, we're going to give it a version. So it's not in the catalog. Now it is. And we're going to give it version 0.002. Awesome. So now we've created this Mind workflow blueprint. We're going to go apply it to an existing project. So in this case, I'm applying it to a very common known vulnerable application. You may have heard of Juice Shop before. It's popular in the OWASP community. It's a vulnerable TypeScript application that you use to teach developers of things not to do. So it's riddled with vulnerabilities. So what we're going to do is we're just going to apply this blueprint. And after we apply the blueprint, first we need to go to the space blueprints, select Min scan workflow, hit next, and then it's going to show us what the source code changes will be. Apply that blueprint. And then remember, this only happens when we do a pull request to main. So now I actually need to go make code changes In this case, we've kind of set up a normal development lifecycle. You're in the development branch, and you want to make a code change and push it to main for a release. So we'll go ahead and create this pull request. And if you've been following along, what should happen next? Our workflow should run. And then that workflow should run doing our min security scan. So as Harry pointed out, this was really easy to do for like one project or one application. To think about just being the power of this, being able to do it for thousands of applications all at once and apply your security. So here we are running the min scan because we've done a pull request to main. We'll zoom in a little bit and you'll see that what it's actually doing is it's looking at all of your third-party libraries and the open source vulnerabilities associated to them and letting you know if there's any licensing risk or known vulnerabilities. So this runs pretty quickly, and then what will happen, down at the bottom you see it generates that report, and then it's going to come back and actually fail because we had a critical vulnerability. So because we failed, we should go up, take a look at the report, and see, hey, there's definitely one critical vulnerability, but what about the other 10? Need to fix all of those. So we can go review the report, and we can see the suggestions on how we fix these different vulnerabilities. So this first one, and you keep this in mind, notice that it says there's no fix. That's pretty typical sometimes. There may not be a fix. Next one, another common, hey, we just upgrade to another version. So when you think about this, we can either upgrade to a version or there may not be a fix. If there's not a fix, that means there's a massive architectural change we have to make because we need to replace that library. So this is kind of along best practices, the SAM best practices. I don't recommend breaking on critical just CVSS scoring because there's a lot of other factors you have to take into consideration. Like, is this vulnerability actually exploitable? You know, what's the EPSS score? Are there public exploits available? How much time is it going to take to fix this vulnerability versus just applying a pipeline or applying a blueprint like this across the whole organization and breaking pipelines? So having that security scan easily applied, fantastic. With that, that is the end of the demo, so I'll invite Harry back up to go ahead and close us out.
Thanks, Sam. This is great.
Thank you.
Thank you. So there you saw just one example of how you could use project blueprints to ensure that your teams are building the way you want them to on AWS. These features are available today. They're part of the enterprise tier. I invite you to go to CodeCatalyst.aws and give them a try. If you have any questions, we'll be on the side of the stage to answer any questions, and hope to see you soon. Have a good rest of the show. Thank you.